Nothing is broken. What you're feeling right now is the signal. The silence, the lack of urgency, the strange pause where motivation feels different is not a delay, it's preparation. This phase confuses people because it doesn't look like progress, it looks like stillness. But real change doesn't begin with visible movement. It begins with internal reconfiguration. When you asked for transformation, you didn't activate a chain of external events. You triggered a shift in probability itself. And probability can't settle into reality until you are coherent enough to hold it. That's why the old drives feel weaker. The goals that once pulled you feel distant, and the chase no longer excites you. This isn't loss of ambition, it's recalibration. Your system is shedding outdated signals, dissolving tolerance for noise, pressure, and empty rewards. The field isn't responding to desire alone, it responds to alignment. Before outcomes change, perception changes. Before momentum returns, identity restructures. What feels like nothing happening is actually everything moving beneath the surface, quietly, precisely, and intentionally, so that what comes next can finally stabilize. Before a major identity update, the brain enters a period of uncertainty. Dopamine-driven motivation drops. Familiar patterns lose their grip. This isn't collapse, it's flexibility. The nervous system is loosening old predictions so it can encode new ones. And during that window, the mind interprets neutrality as stagnation, even though it's the most fertile state for change. Spiritually, this is the space between identities. You don't feel like who you were, but you don't yet feel anchored in who you're becoming. That in-between state feels uncomfortable because it lacks reference points. There's nothing to chase and nothing to fix. And for a system conditioned to equate movement with safety, that stillness can feel threatening. This is where most people interrupt the process. They mistake silence for failure and try to force momentum. They add pressure, goals, affirmations, or distractions, not realizing they're pulling themselves back into the old frequency just as it was dissolving. The quantum field reads that interference clearly. It pauses, not as punishment, but as precision. What you asked for is not late. It is. Old reward loops. Dopamine spikes decrease. The constant chase loses appeal. This isn't depression. It's disengagement from patterns that are no longer congruent. The brain is clearing bandwidth. This is why people often describe this phase as feeling neutral, not happy, not sad, just quiet. And neutrality can be unsettling if you've spent most of your life oscillating between desire and frustration. But neutrality is where reorganization happens. It's where new internal predictions can form without being overridden by old expectations. Spiritually, this phase has been described across traditions as a void, a desert, or a wilderness. Not because it's barren, but because it strips away false orientation. You can't rely on the old compass anymore, but the new one hasn't fully calibrated yet. That lineal space forces presence. This is also where trust is misunderstood. Trust isn't believing something good will happen. Trust is allowing the process to unfold without demanding reassurance every step of the way. And the universe tests this not through chaos but through stillness. It removes distractions and watches whether you rush to refill the space. Many people do. They panic at the quiet. They return to overthinking, overplanning, overproducing. Not because they need to, but because the old identity feels unsafe without movement. And every time they do that, they pull themselves back into the frequency that's trying to dissolve. Preparation asks for restraint, not inactivity, but restraint from interference. It asks you to notice when you're about to fill the space with noise and choose not to. This is not discipline in the traditional sense. It's maturity of awareness. The reason this phase feels invisible is because the changes are happening at the level that creates everything else. Your relationship with time is shifting. You're less rushed, less reactive, more selective. That alone changes outcomes, dramatically even before anything external rearranges. You may also notice that your intuition sharpens here, not in a dramatic, mystical way, but in a practical one. You sense when to move, and when not to. You stop forcing clarity. You let it arrive. This is coherence forming. And coherence is what the quantum field recognizes as readiness. What's important to understand is that preparation doesn't feel good in the way motivation feels good. It feels stable, grounded, less emotional. And that lack of emotional charge can trick the mind into thinking nothing important is happening. But the most significant shifts rarely announce themselves with emotion. They integrate quietly. They feel obvious only in hindsight. If you're in this phase, your job is not to accelerate it. Acceleration fractures coherence. Your job is to stay present without trying to define what's coming next, to allow the old internal scaffolding to dismantle without rebuilding it prematurely. This is the part of manifestation that can't be rushed because it determines whether what arrives will stay. The field isn't withholding anything from you. It's ensuring stability before collapse. And once stability is achieved, the shift doesn't require effort. It requires recognition. You'll recognize it when it happens because nothing inside you will argue with it. That's how you know preparation is complete. What you asked for didn't fail to arrive because it was too big. It paused because the version of you who asked for it couldn't sustain it yet. That's the part manifestation teachings often skip. Not every desire can land inside the same identity that created the desire. The quantum field doesn't deliver outcomes in isolation. It delivers entire states of being. And every state comes with a corresponding level of responsibility, perception, and internal regulation. If those elements aren't in place, the field delays not to deny you, but to protect coherence. This is why some manifestations arrive quickly and then collapse just as fast. The external reality shows up before the internal structure is ready to hold it. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed. Old coping strategies resurface. The identity fractures under the weight of what it received and the person assumes they lost it when in truth they outpaced their own integration. What you're being prepared for now is not just the thing you asked for, but the version of yourself that can live inside that reality without destabilizing it. From a neurological perspective, this makes perfect sense. The brain operates on prediction and familiarity. When something arrives that exceeds what the nervous system recognizes as normal, the system interprets it as a threat, even if it's positive. This triggers self-sabotage, withdrawal, or over-control. The brain isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to preserve internal stability. That's why preparation focuses on identity before outcome. The system must learn that the new reality is safe, sustainable, and familiar. And that learning doesn't happen through imagination alone. It happens through gradual internal recalibration, reduced urgency, increased presence, and a softened relationship with control. Spiritually, this has always been understood as expansion of capacity. You don't receive what you want, you receive what you can hold. And holding something new requires releasing the structures that were built to survive without it. This is where the process becomes uncomfortable, because what dissolves first is not circumstance but self-concept. You start noticing that the version of you who needed to struggle, prove, or constantly anticipate the next obstacle no longer fits. The old identity begins to feel heavy, outdated, and misaligned. This is also why preparation often includes loss that doesn't look dramatic. You lose interest. You lose urgency. You lose the emotional charge that once fueled your ambition. And the mind panics because it interprets that loss as regression, but it's not regression. It's transition. You're shedding the emotional mechanics that kept you moving when coherence wasn't available yet. The field understands something the mind resists. Effort was a bridge, not a destination. The habits that helped you survive the old reality cannot be the ones that sustain the new one. And until you stop relying on them, the shift remains incomplete. This is why patience becomes essential here. Not passive patience, but embodied patience. The ability to stay present without demanding immediate evidence. The ability to remain open without micromanaging timing. The ability to trust that internal restructuring is not wasted time, but necessary sequencing. When the identity stabilizes, Manifestation accelerates without force. Things don't arrive explosively. They align naturally. Opportunities feel obvious instead of miraculous. Decisions require less overthinking. You move at the right moment because you're internal. Timing matches the external one. That's the preparation completing itself. If you're feeling less desperate, less reactive, less invested in controlling how things should unfold, that's not a sign you've stopped wanting what you asked for. It's a sign you're becoming compatible with it. The universe isn't asking you to want less. It's asking you to become more stable. And stability isn't built through effort. It's built through release. What you asked for is not waiting on the other side of time. It's waiting on the other side of identity. And once that identity locks in, nothing needs to be forced. Reality recognizes you immediately. Trust is not what people think it is. It's not optimism. It's not positive thinking. And it's definitely not pretending. Everything will work out. Trust at this level is structural. It's what remains when the need to interfere dissolves. The reason trust becomes so central right before a manifestation collapses into form is because interference is the last thing keeping the old identity alive. As long as you feel the urge to check, adjust, rush, or control the process, part of you is still anchored to the version that doesn't fully believe reality can meet you without effort. From a quantum perspective, collapse happens when observation stabilizes, not when desire peaks, not when emotion intensifies, but when the observer stops oscillating. And oscillation comes from doubt disguised as vigilance. This is why trust the universe feels frustrating advice to people who are still inside survival-based identities. Because to a nervous system that learned safety through control, trust feels like danger. It feels like letting go of the only leverage you think you have. But in truth, control was never leverage. It was compensation. Neuroscience makes this clear. When the brain perceives uncertainty, it increases prediction and monitoring that creates mental noise, and noise disrupts coherence. Trust, in contrast, signals safety. When the nervous system relaxes its grip, perception widens, timing improves, decisions become cleaner. You don't miss opportunities because you're no longer bracing against life. Spiritually, trust is the moment you stop negotiating with the future. You're no longer asking, when will it happen, or am I doing this right? Those questions belong to an identity that believes alignment must be earned continuously. The aligned identity doesn't ask those questions because it no longer doubts its compatibility. This is why trust often feels boring. There's no emotional spike, no anticipation, no drama, just steadiness. And steadiness is exactly what allows reality to reorganize efficiently. The field responds to stable signals, not anxious ones. What most people don't realize is that impatience delays manifestation more than doubt ever could. Impatience is a declaration that the present moment is insufficient, and that declaration keeps you oriented toward lack even if everything else is aligned. The field hears that immediately. Trust is not passive. It's precise. It's the ability to remain internally consistent without external confirmation, to stay coherent without proof, to stop adjusting the signal just because nothing visible has happened yet. This is why the final phase of preparation often feels like restraint. You feel the urge to act, explain, or move, and you don't. Not because you're avoiding action, but because action isn't required yet. Timing is, and timing can't be forced without fracturing the outcome. You may notice that when trust stabilizes, synchronicity increases quietly. Conversations land differently. Information arrives at the exact moment. It's useful. Opportunities don't feel lucky. They feel obvious. That's because your internal timing is now synchronized with the field's response. This is the last adjustment before collapse. When you no longer ask reality to prove itself to you, when you stop watching the door and simply remain available for what fits. And here's the paradox. The moment you truly trust, you stop caring whether it arrives today or later. And that release of urgency is often what allows it to arrive at all. Trust doesn't say, I hope this works. Trust says, I don't need to interfere. At that point, the old identity has nothing left to do. Its strategies no longer apply. Its fears no longer govern decisions. And without resistance, the field completes what it began the moment you asked. If you're here feeling calm, without answers, steady without guarantees, and less concerned with timing than you used to be, this is not you giving up. This is you aligning so precisely that effort is no longer necessary. And when that happens, manifestation doesn't feel magical. It feels natural because the only thing that was ever in the way was interference. At this point, the preparation is no longer theoretical. It's embodied. You don't need more understanding. You need stability. The kind that doesn't fluctuate based on mood, timing, or external validation. This is where manifestation quietly completes itself, not through action, but through alignment that no longer needs supervision. What you asked for was never waiting for the right conditions outside of you. It was waiting for the internal environment to become coherent enough to receive it without distortion. That coherence isn't excitement. It isn't certainty. It's neutrality with readiness, calm with availability. This is why the final phase doesn't feel dramatic. There's no emotional climax, no moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, there's a quiet internal click, a sense that you don't need to chase clarity anymore, that you don't need to rehearse the future or prepare for every possible outcome. You're simply here, present, responsive, and grounded. From a quantum perspective, this is when probability collapses cleanly. Not because you demanded it, but because the observer stabilized. The field doesn't rush to impress you. It arranges reality efficiently when the signal is clear. And clarity always arrives after interference stops. Neuroscience mirrors this perfectly. When the nervous system exits hypervigilance, perception sharpens. You notice opportunities without scanning for them. You respond instead of react. Decisions feel obvious instead of heavy. That's not luck. That's regulation meeting timing. Spiritually, this is receiving without grasping. You're no longer trying to manifest. You're allowing life to meet you where you already are. And because there's no internal resistance left, what arrives doesn't feel overwhelming or fragile. It feels sustainable. This is also where many people unintentionally sabotage themselves, not by doing something wrong, but by doubting the quiet. They expect manifestation to feel explosive. When it feels subtle, they assume they missed it. But subtlety is the signature of alignment. Loud changes belong to unstable systems. Stable shifts arrive softly. You don't need to announce that your life is changing. You don't need to prove that you're aligned. You don't need to explain what you're becoming. The less you interfere, the faster reality completes the transition. If you're in this phase, the only thing asked of you now is consistency, not effort. Consistency of presence, consistency of internal posture, consistency of trust without passivity. You move when movement feels clean. You wait when waiting feels neutral. You stop forcing meaning into every delay. And this is where structure can support integration, not as a method to manifest, but as a way to remain coherent while reality reorganizes. That's why quantum rebirth exists. It was created to help stabilize identity during these exact transitions, so you don't unconsciously revert to old patterns once things begin to move. Alongside it, the quantum grimoire serves as a practical companion, a space to observe, reflect, and anchor the internal shifts that are already happening without turning them into pressure. Nothing here is about chasing the universe. Nothing is about convincing it to respond. What you asked for is already responding. It's adjusting around the version of you that no longer interferes. And when it arrives, it won't feel like a miracle. It will feel like recognition, like something that finally fits. Because the truth is simple. Even if it took time to see it, you were never being delayed. You were being prepared. And preparation is complete the moment you stop asking for proof.